This is time tested. They're swinging axes at other dudes swinging axes. The ones who survived were all big.
Yeah, that's true.
These guys are so big, man. You got to read this article that Vice did on these strong men in Iceland.
Okay.
It's crazy, bro.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a whole country filled with gorillas. Big white gorillas.
Greetings to the enthusiasts of adventures and historical epics. Put on your horn-adorned helmets and get ready to embark on the enchanting world of the Vikings. Forget the stereotypes from video games or textbooks because what we are about to discover goes far beyond those cliches. Let's start by debunking these idealized images of the Vikings. No more the blonde, blue-eyed warrior. And DNA analysis of more than 442 skeletons revealed a very different reality. A majority with brown hair and dark eyes, with an average height of 1.75 meters. These legendary sailors possessed astonishing genetic diversity from various regions. Why this diversity? Because the term Viking did not refer to a specific ethnicity, but rather a concept. In Old Norse, it literally means maritime bay. Over time, it evolved into Go Viking, expressing the idea of earning a living by navigating. Initially associated with pirates, the term later encompassed merchants, warriors, and explorers. The intrepid explorers, the Vikings, didn't just navigate the northern seas of Europe. Their trade routes stretched from raiding in Spain to the far reaches of Morocco. They were even found at the gates of Constantinople and Baghdad, with unexpected artifacts like Buddha statues or coins in the heart of Uzbekistan. Can you imagine these Nordic sailors under scorching sun? Yet, their footprints extend to all corners of the world, even beyond the known lands. Now, hold your breath because the history we know of Christopher Columbus's discovery of America is incomplete. 500 years earlier, the Vikings had already set foot on these unexplored lands. From Iceland, they sailed west, establishing a picturesque village named Vinland, the land of vines. Long considered a myth, this story came to life in 1960 with the discovery of a Viking village in Newfoundland, Canada. Finding the exact location of this first colony was an exciting quest. Clues seemed to converge toward a clear answer, but in 2018, a twist reminded us of the uncertainty of history. A map promising answers turned out to be a false lead. What we know for sure is that the Viking colony did not thrive for long, likely driven away by indigenous peoples. As for the Viking weapons, they are not what you might think. The classic image of a Viking, adorned with horns on the helmet, wielding a massive axe on a dragon ship in the midst of stormy waves, is quite fanciful. The truth about their war attire is much more modest. No horned helmets, an accessory that never existed and would have been impractical on the battlefield. The concept of horns actually comes from a Wagnerian opera costume. And as for imposing axes, forget about them. The Vikings preferred spears, bows, and of course, swords, some engraved with the inscription plus Valfbait plus as a mark of their quality. Let's talk for a moment about their vessels, often associated with the famous Drakkar. The reality is that the term Drakkar, meaning dragon, is a 19th century appellation. These ships were actually long ships, true marvels of technology allowing navigation in shallow waters and in all directions. A persistent myth suggests that the Vikings were navigation experts thanks to a mysterious sunstone, a magical crystal revealing the sun's position in cloudy weather or beyond the horizon. The reality, though less fantastic, could rest on calcite, a crystal capable of refracting light rays. With some practice, this crystal could indeed have played a role in their navigation. Finally, let's address the cliché of the animal skin. While most Vikings wore conventional armor, a grain of truth lies in the existence of the formidable Berserkers. This term, from Norse legends, evokes warriors in wild trance, sometimes even naked, insensitive to pain and fighting with animal ferocity. A striking image that reveals a particular reality of warriors of that time. The most widespread theory about the frenzied behavior of berserkers suggests that they could be under the influence of psychotropic substances, potentially the black henbane found in a grave in Denmark. This plant with hallucinogenic effects was even used in ancient Greece to induce divinatory trances. Another hypothesis suggests that their state could result from a strategic bluff, similar to a war dance like the haka. The Vikings were masters in the art of intimidation, going so far as to engrave patterns on their teeth. By the way, the Bluetooth logo originates from the name Harald Bluetooth, referring to an ancient king of Denmark. Don't be fooled by the image of brutal fighters. The Vikings were much more than that. Their strategic intelligence was remarkable. Espionage was their game, gathering information on the location of wealth, vulnerable moments of monasteries, and the personalities of villages for quick decision-making. Their surprise attacks, called Strand Hug, were formidable. The result for the inhabitants ranged from total loss to the worst, ending up as slaves. Slavery, a central component of their culture, transformed Dublin into a hub of this practice. The question arises, was Viking culture inherently violent? Of course, raiding villages and enslaving people doesn't place them among the good guys, but the reality, as dark as it may be, shows that they were far from the monstrous and bloodthirsty descriptions. You may have heard of the blood eagle sacrifice ritual, the horrible practice of removing the ribs of a living victim to create bird wings to hang on a mass grave. An Old Norse poem does mention an engraved eagle, but the idea of drinking from skulls is a translation error. The curved tree of skulls is a metaphor for symbolic horns, not a Viking practice manual. Let's take a critical look at some Viking names that may seem intimidating, such as Ivar Ragnarsson, often described as the Berserker King. In reality, Ragnarsson could mean boneless, potentially a metaphor for powerlessness, far from the cruel image one might imagine. Continuing our investigation into Viking funeral rites, forget the image of women burned with the ship of their deceased husbands. It's a bit more complex than that. While human sacrifices at burials are documented, the ritual of the pyre with the boat is not the most common method. The Vikings were more sophisticated than one might think, placing particular importance on hygiene, washing, grooming, and even burying the deceased with beauty accessories. Christianity, with its external perspective, has long demonized the Vikings, portraying them as bloodthirsty barbarians, especially due to their strangeness, paganism, and church raids. Now, let's address the question of the Vikings' reputation as democrats and egalitarians. Some recent articles have suggested that the Vikings might have been a more egalitarian society than expected, but let's untangle the myth from reality. A recent claim rested on the discovery of a woman buried with weapons, horses, and even a gaming board, suggesting a society where men and women were equal. However, the reality is more nuanced. In practice, the Vikings were far from an egalitarian society. While women could seek divorce, this already existed in Greek and Roman societies. The wives of chiefs could temporarily take charge of the household in the absence of their husbands, but their role as family leaders was temporary until a potential remarriage. The idea of Viking democracy has also been discussed, but kings, though present, did not always have absolute power. Political life revolved around things, assemblies of clan leaders where speech was free, but writing was rare, leaving room for oral knowledge. However, this freedom of speech was not universal. Women, common people, and slaves were excluded from these assemblies. Viking society was rather oligarchic, where wealth and power dictated existence. Viking trials attest to unequal justice, far from the notion of equal citizens. For slaves, Representing 10% of the population, it was a horror. The writings of an Arab diplomat reveal cruel practices such as sexual slavery of captured women, sacrificed upon their master's death to accompany him to the afterlife. The graves of powerful men reveal additional horrors with decapitated or stabbed skeletons, sometimes alongside their slaves. Beyond the stereotypes, what do the remnants of these formidable warriors reveal? First, let's dispel the myth of Viking extinction. They didn't vanish, but rather merged with local cultures. In Brittany, for example, the Vikings integrated, leaving an indelible mark. The advent of Christianity marked a turning point. Raids and slavery became unpopular as Western societies strengthened their fortifications. The richness of Viking culture, often shrouded in mystery, stems from the fact that they left few written or archaeological traces. Forget about majestic temples, as only a modest wooden building has been found. Viking daily life unfolded in nature, near trees and rivers. Writing didn't take the form of rune-inscribed books, but rather short messages, names on objects, warnings, or even insults tagged on walls. What we know comes from later writings, often in Latin, well after the Viking era. Despite that, the Vikings have left behind fascinating cultural elements for the world. Their creativity has inspired fantasy masterpieces such as The Lord of the Rings, Skyrim, and The Witcher, crossing centuries to continue nourishing our imagination today. If you enjoyed our exploration of Viking history, customs, and legacy, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss any of our future temporal adventures. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Stay tuned for more captivating explorations.